Look, it's a tremendous honor to be here. I wrote this book for my students at MIT originally. And then when we realized, boy, we have something that we could get out to the rest of the world, I thought about how do we get it out to the rest of the world. And you'll notice the book is made to be fun. The book, Entrepreneurship Should Be Fun. So we have kind of characters in it. But don't be confused that there's not a lot of rigor behind it. MIT doesn't do things. There you guys are. MIT doesn't do things that aren't rigorous. But we wanted to make it accessible to a broad variety of people. And so one of the things from day one that I wanted to do was to get it out in multiple languages. Because their great entrepreneurs are not confined to the United States. They're not confined to one language. And by the work that's been done, it shows that by 2030, that Spanish, after Chinese, will be the #1 native tongue of people in the world. That's amazing. So when you think about Latin American things, so I really wanted to get this book out in Spanish. And it's been a long, hard push to do that. So this is a very proud day. So with that being said, let me tell you about disciplined entrepreneurship, okay? What is it and why does it matter? By the way, if you have any questions and you tweet them to me there, I will answer them because that forces you to ask your question in 140 characters, and I'll respond in 140 characters, and I can do that easy. So entrepreneurship has become a very cool thing. How many of you out there are entrepreneurs today? Okay, how many of you want to become entrepreneurs? That's not enough. All you young people, this is what you should want to be. That's what I want to convince you. When I graduated from college, which was a long time ago in 1980, nobody wanted to be an entrepreneur. I didn't even know what that word was. If you went home and told your parents, I'm going to be an entrepreneur, they would say, what are you, unemployed? But today, being an entrepreneur is actually a prestigious thing. It's a proud thing. You know, people talk about, oh, my kid is an entrepreneur. And they say, oh, what are they doing? And it's a very well-established, honored profession in the United States. And that's what it needs to be, because entrepreneurship is what's going to solve the world's problems. It is the solution historically to the world's most intractable problems. The world's biggest problems haven't been solved by governments. They haven't been solved by big companies traditionally. Yes, in some cases you can, but more often than not, it's been by entrepreneurs attacking these problems. And not just one, but thousands of entrepreneurs trying thousands of different things in thousands of different garages around the world. And with the problems we have today in education, healthcare, environment, energy, just plain jobs, creating jobs, we need entrepreneurs more than ever before. And governments realize that. You know, governments realize that. In the presidential election in the United States, when Obama was running for his second term, he couldn't say how he loved entrepreneurs enough. He was constantly asking, what can we do for entrepreneurs? What can we do for entrepreneurs? As was his competitor. What can we do for entrepreneurs? You look at places like United Kingdom now, David Cameron. This guy wouldn't know what an entrepreneur was 10 years ago. And now he embraces entrepreneurship, not because he loves entrepreneurs, but because he knows this is the solution to the economic problems and other problems that we have. So entrepreneurship is a very, very interesting thing to governments, but it should also be very interesting to you young people as well. I have 4 kids. You should say you don't look that old. Actually, I am that old. The jobs, when I grew up, you would be a lawyer, a doctor, work for a big company, the government. Those jobs aren't there anymore. One of my sons works for a startup. His friends work for startups. That's where the jobs are. But not only that's where the jobs are, that's where the fun is. Those are the jobs that people are having the most fun in. And let me tell you one of the reasons why, is because you control your own destiny. You don't have to go interview for a job that's kind of the job you want. You get to create your own job, the one that you want. If you're an artist, you don't want to go up to a painting that's kind of 3/4 done and say, hey, paint this piece of fruit in this picture. No, you want a blank canvas if you're an artist, and you want to create your own painting. And that's what happens when you're an entrepreneur. And you can create the job, the company that's going to do what you want to do with the culture you want to do. So this is not a fad about entrepreneurship. This is here to stay, and it will. But when we're talking about entrepreneurship, the first rule of engineering is define your terms. So what is entrepreneurship? What is entrepreneurship? And there's a lot of misunderstanding here in Spain and elsewhere around the world. So let's just talk about that for a second. An entrepreneur is often considered someone who starts a new company where there was no company before. So that would leave two types of entrepreneurs. If you buy into that definition, there's what we call SME entrepreneurs, and these are entrepreneurs who start a tapas bar. They'll start a nail salon. They'll start a little IT service company. These are good. They're very good. They help the economy. They're geographically distributed. But these are what we call SMEs, small, medium enterprises. These go after a regional, local market. And they very much are a service industry that's hard to scale. On the other hand, there are these other businesses, which are also good. These are called innovation-driven enterprise entrepreneurship. What's the difference between them? These go after global markets. These are not saying, we're just going to sell in our little town, we're just going to sell in our neighborhood in Madrid. We are looking to sell across the world or across Europe. So Roberto and Javier have a company. They're looking to sell their product around the world. It's not something that's just localized. And in these companies, these actually are hard. There's more risk associated with them. But guess what? When you get them right, their growth is it's unfettered. It just keeps going on. These over here, your growth is kind of linear and it goes like this. They're lower risk, but there's less upside. In these, you have to kind of raise money and you have to take some more risk, but your upside is terrific. And these are the ones that transform economies. These are the ones that create high numbers of jobs. And those are the ones that Spain needs to focus more on. And that's what the world needs to focus more on. And that's what MIT really does well, the ones on your right, my left. So it's the delta T, that means the time to get them to work is longer, but when you get them, they grow exponentially. But there's a lot of investment required in it. They're not as easy, but it's worth the effort when you get them right. So, should you be an entrepreneur? Is it good? The answer is yes. I've kind of laid that out, why you should be an entrepreneur. The next question that people have is, can you teach entrepreneurship? And we hear this all the time. Entrepreneurs are born. This is not true. This is not true. And let me just tell you, I used to believe that it was true, but it's not true. And let me tell you why. Because we have data. My first company that I started was a company called Cambridge Decision Dynamics. If you get on the internet, you will find this company is in deep stealth mode. What that means is it doesn't exist. It was a failure. It was a failure. And that's what happens often. But that's how you learn. And then the next company called Sensible Technologies was actually pretty successful. But my third company was very successful. It went from 50 million market cap to $500 million market cap in 2.5 years. Did I get smarter? Did somebody put some new genes in me that I didn't have before, DNA? The answer is no. What happens is, and the data is very clear, the people who start companies, the more times they start a company, the better they get at it. The second time, the odds of success are higher. Then the third time, it's even higher in the magnitude of success. Should this be surprising? Not at all. It's the same thing if you play sports or if you teach or you do something. You get better at it over time. That's just the way it is. It's nothing magical about it. And there's a whole bunch of other things out there that are myths. If you're interested, just go on the internet. I've written this article, 7 harmful myths that people start about entrepreneurs. You can learn entrepreneurship. The question is, how do you do that? How do you learn what the people learn from the first company, the second company, the third company, and the fourth company? How do you do that? And the question isn't why or can you do it? The question is, how do we do it? How do we teach entrepreneurship? And that is the challenge that we're setting out to now. And I'll tell you, we've got a lot of work to do, but this book hopefully is starting a serious discussion about how to do that in a new way. So, like I wrote an op-ed piece for a newspaper in the United States called the Wall Street Journal. And it was basically, I titled it, The Coming Crisis in Entrepreneurship Education. They turned that around and said entrepreneurship education is in its infancy. But what basically the point of the article is, the op-ed piece, is that demand for entrepreneurship education is skyrocketing because there are fewer options. It's become a cool thing now. It's become more acceptable. Students love it. So entrepreneurship is now taught in thousands of schools. Just 20 years ago, it was at best 100, maybe 200 schools taught entrepreneurship. We've gone an order of magnitude increase. That sounds good, Bill. That sounds really good. Well, let me tell you, that is good that we're realizing entrepreneurship education is important because we need more entrepreneurs. Here's the problem. It's hard to scale entrepreneurship education, good quality entrepreneurship education. Because, first of all, when you do, it's not like teaching math or physics or chemistry, because then, 1 + 1 always equals 2 in math. And that's true for everybody. In chemistry, the molecules are the same. In physics, the physics equations are the same. In entrepreneurship, one person can be working on a healthcare startup, a medical device. Someone else is working on an energy startup. Somebody else is working on an app, a new operating system. Somebody else is working on a social enterprise in Africa. How can these things be the same? How can there be anything? The context of them makes it very hard to teach it. And I saw this because in my classes, we were going from 20 people to 40 people to 200 people. And I just couldn't scale it because you can't understand every single thing when you're scaling it. The second part about it is that you need a lot of mentorship in that case. And it's hard to scale bodies like that, knowledgeable bodies. But the third part is that people don't like to talk about is there hasn't been a lot of scholarly work done in the field of entrepreneurship. And this is very unfortunate, but it's very understandable. Because if you're in an academic institution, your goal is to try to get tenure. Do research that's rigorous, that stands the test of time. And if you want to do that, you get good, clean data sets that you can compare one against the other. So where do you get these data sets? You get them from financial institutions, big companies, other places. The last place you want to get data sets is from startups that are struggling for survival, keeping them one way on one computer, another way on a different computer. It's hard to compare this and get good, clean data. So there hasn't been a lot of work done in this area. And the last thing is, it's easy to fake entrepreneurship education. It's easy to fake entrepreneurship education. I know, I did it. I used to go into the entrepreneurship class at MIT before I was responsible, and they'd say, come give a guest talk. And I'd come in and say, entrepreneurship, it's like basketball. You just got to work harder than anybody else. You've got to try harder. You've got to get up early in the morning. You've got to know your competitor, and you must have this will to win. You must not fear failure. All this kind of rubbish that might be true, but it's not a construct for building a company. What do you do with all that at the end of the day? You say, I'm inspired by that. This is what I call storytelling. Telling a bunch of stories about entrepreneurship. You inspire these young people, and they go and they say, I want to do it. They sit down on Monday morning and say, I want to be an entrepreneur. Where do I start? Don't worry about failing. I know, you told me that last week, but now what do I do? Work harder. I know, but what do I work on? There was no kind of prescriptive way as to how to get started. And there was no rigor. There were people who were putting things together, but they were pure practitioners. There was no scholarly work on it. Now, I'm not saying that storytelling doesn't help. I actually do, we do storytelling to some degree because entrepreneurship is not all about skills. It's about spirit. And what we have at our center is we talk a lot about the spirit to be different. If all the fish are swimming this way, are you willing to swim that way? Are you willing to be different? And that's important because entrepreneurship is about change. It's about seeing the world the way it is today and saying, there's a better way, and we're going to change it. And so we talk about it's more fun to be a pirate than to join the Navy, the quote from Steve Jobs. And we say, you got to have the spirit of a pirate. You got to be willing to be different. And so entrepreneurship starts with the spirit. But then after that, you've got to add to the spirit, you've got to add skills to it. You've got to take this kind of creative irreverence and you've got to take the spirit and you've got to add skills to it. And that's where things fall short. If you tell stories, you're getting people excited, but you can't deliver the goods. So, how should entrepreneurship be taught? First of all, we should stop trying to look for entrepreneurship gurus. This doesn't help. There's a lot we can learn from different people. The question is, how do we bring it all together? This is way too important to say that there's one person who's the guru of entrepreneurship. We need to get a common language and get everybody contributing to it, a common platform. The next thing is, we can't act like there's one kind of key thing. We have to understand it's a complicated system to start a company. And we have to take this systems approach. There's no one single thing to start a company. That list, it doesn't work that way. It's a complicated system and you have to understand how things go up, how things work. Where's the leverage? The last thing is we need to get more scholarly work, but take that scholarly work and connect it to the real world, to have practical uses of this scholarly work. This is not something we haven't seen before. Medicine used to be a lot of research and a lot of doctors practicing, and there wasn't much between them. What happens is that you put this translational research connective tissue between them, and that connects the scholarly work to the real world, and both benefit from it. Because scholarly work, people say, well, geez, this should work. The practitioners say, but that's not how it works in the real world. But the practitioners, on the other hand, don't have the ability to do this rigorous analysis that these other people have been trained for. So having both those together is very, very important. I think the other thing is you've got to have heterogeneity in it. You can't just say entrepreneurship should be taught in the business school. Entrepreneurship should only be taught in the engineering school. It's a cross-discipline study that needs everybody to play with it, including design. So that being said, well, what are you offering here today? When I thought about this and I had to take over the class and run the class, I realized that if those things are true, what I just said, we need to build up a toolbox. We need to stop thinking about there's a single tool, a single truth that will unleash you to be a successful entrepreneur. It's a complex system, and you wouldn't build a house with one tool. So why in the world would we think about building a company with one tool? So what we did is we looked around and we figured out what are all the best tools out there, and let's bring those together, and then let's validate those with some real serious academics who can tell us, is this good or is this not good? Is there data to back this up? And then as a practitioner, I weigh in and say, I think this is good, I think that's not good. But all this debate produces a new type of toolbox. And that's what we do. So there's the toolbox and the roadmap. And by purposefully, I made it so that it was not imposing to people. It's actually very accessible. Am I going too fast for the translation? Is the translation working well? Yes? Okay. So this was kind of summarizing the book from a content standpoint. And what you have here, people say, wow, look at that. That doesn't look right. Can't you make it a straight line? And the answer is no. Entrepreneurship is not a straight line. This is not an algorithm. This is an iterative process that we're going to go through here to find the truth. And you talk to anybody who's done entrepreneurship, they understand that. It's not an algorithm. It's a framework that you go through. And as you learn more, you go back and update previous steps. They say, wow, but do we need 24? Can't you simplify it to 4? The answer is no. This is a simplification to get to 24, but we think that's the right number. Maybe over time we'll figure out that it could be 21, it could be 26, but these are the key areas that we have decided to go through, and you skip any one at your own peril. And I can show you companies that have skipped steps, and then they run into trouble later. You might skip steps and you might be fine. But if you want to minimize your chance of failure and maximize your chance of success, you need to understand all 24. So, well, what's going on with these different colors? So there are different themes as you go through here, right? And so when you start a company, you start out with an idea. Now, many people in my class, they say, well, I want to do entrepreneurship, but I don't have an idea. Let me just tell you what I tell them. Ideas are the single most overrated thing in entrepreneurship. Let me repeat that. Ideas are the single most overrated thing in entrepreneurship. Ideas cost money. It's execution that makes money. And when people sit around and say, I have this idea and somebody else is doing it, I have a better idea, that means they've lost. That means they've lost. Because the idea just starts the process. You have to have an idea, but the process is much more important than the idea. And we have research now that shows so many people who start with an idea that are successful, the idea changes so much over time that it's almost irrelevant. And other people have mediocre ideas and they are very successful, and people who have seemingly great ideas and they're not successful. If you want to bet on one thing, bet on whether people have a good process. But if you want the number one thing to bet on, are they a good team? Do they have a good team that's dedicated to success? Do they work well together? Or are they do they have a heterogeneous team, people with different skills? Ed Roberts' research showed that entrepreneurship is not an individual sport. This is a harmful myth that people have, that entrepreneurship is the singular mercurial entrepreneur. The odds of success of a two-person team are dramatically more than a one-person team. A three-person team is higher than a two-person team. In fact, a four-person is even higher than a three-person. So the more people you have, the better off you are. So where do we start? Where do we start here? We have the idea, but now we're going to start. I don't care about your idea. As long as it's sufficient and it's good enough to draw 2 or 3 other people, let's start the process. So let's build a product. No. Where we start is with the customer. The single necessary and sufficient condition for a business is a paying customer. If you do not have a paying customer, you do not have a business. If you have a paying customer, you have a business. This is simple definition, right? Let's go back to it. So business isn't that complicated. You got to figure out how you get paying customers that are profitable for you and that you can scale in a sustainable way. Just because you have a paying customer doesn't mean it's a great business, as we're going to go through, but this is what we need to focus on. So design-centered, user-driven design, this has been around for a while. The Germans have been doing it. Eric von Hippel at MIT has been doing it. And I did it in my companies. I saw that when I tried to push out stuff because I thought I knew what was best for them, and I didn't really understand the customer, that I was much less successful. But when I put myself in the customer's shoes and then I built everything back from that, I became very successful. So starting off with who your customer is the critical aspect of building a foundation for a successful company in the process standpoint. Of course, we talk about team, but in the process standpoint, you have to figure out who is your customer and build it back. Again, this is not something new. Procter & Gamble, Unilever, successful companies have been doing this for a long time. We need to get it and consolidate it and make it accessible to entrepreneurs. And that's what we're doing here. We go through process within each step. We say market segmentation, here's what you do. You think of all the potential customers. In step 2, then we say, which is the beachhead customer? Which is the one that you're going to focus on? Because as an entrepreneur, we don't have a lot of resources. We don't have a lot of time. So we have to focus, focus, focus. And so we pick that one market, and we're going to do that real well, and then we're going to deselect everything else. Is that new? No, that's not new. That's been known for military purposes for a long time. If you're an attacker and you're going up against a strong defender, you have to focus your resources, gain a beachhead, and then expand out from there. Is it true for business? Yes. All these things that I'm telling you, we're not reinventing new things. There's no new magic here. This is all proven stuff. The next thing is, once we have our beachhead market, then we build the profile. We start to break down who's the customer. What are the demographics of that customer? How old are they? How much do they make? What do they like to do? Where do they live? What kind of jobs do they have? Then we get into the psychographics as well. Again, well-known things. So now we have a composite, and now we check to see how big is the market for this. The market should not be a multi-billion-dollar market, because if you're 4 people here, students trying to start a company, you can't go after a $10 billion market. Your beachhead market's too big. On the other hand, if your beachhead market is $10,000 a year, your beachhead market's too small. So in here we get into units and we define all this and we give examples, and then you build your persona. The persona is a concept, again, that's been around and we've refined it here. But the persona says, all right, I know who my customer is in general. I know how big the market is. Now we want you to figure out who's the one real customer that represents the rest of this customer base. And you say, why do I need one? I've got a composite. Human beings are able to focus on one person more than generalities. Let me give you a case of this. Studies have shown that if you want to raise money for Africa to stop hunger, you can have one ad over here and it says 10 million people are going to die in Africa, and here's a whole bunch of statistics about it and why you should give money to it. On the other hand, we can have something over here and say, here's a picture of Bill. He's 12 years old. He lives in Africa. He lives in, he lives in Kenya, and his mother is it, and he is going to die if he doesn't get any food. Which one do you think raises more money? This one, by a lot. Why? Because human beings get overwhelmed with data and kind of this, and they love specificity. And when you give them something specific, they can focus. They can concentrate their decisions and make, and get to action much faster. So we get into the point of how you have a real persona. Now, anyone here, like before, you might say the TAM's too big. You circle back, refine your beachhead market. It's too small. We need a new beachhead market. And likewise with the personas, you're going to see we're going to circle back because our persona might not be right, but it's close enough to get started. And then we find 10 additional real customers, we might find a better persona. But we put that picture of that person up there. We describe that person. We understand that person economically, rationally, emotionally, socially. We know where their watering holes are, where they go when they talk to the people who are just like them. That's what watering holes are. You don't hunt animals out in the woods. You wait till they come down to their watering holes, and then you can see them interact with each other. And then you can spread your word of mouth, or you can slaughter them if you so desire. So this is the first step where we talk about how to know your customer. And my thesis at MIT was that showed how great companies understand their customer deeply. Not like some animal at a zoo, like, hey, there's our customer, but the line between them and their customer becomes very blurry. They're able to understand their customers and finish their sentences. They've walked 10 miles in their shoes, just like a great actor. So this is the single most important thing to get started. You need to understand who your customer is and revert this and stop looking at the world through your vision, but turn it around and look at the world through their eyes. And this is the single thing that will start your company off in the right direction. If you don't do that, your odds of success are much, much lower. Then after this, I'm going to kind of go through these other things more quickly, especially because I'm about to run out of time, is after we do that, we then say, what can you do for your customer? And each step, we say, how do you build a full life cycle use case? How do you quantify the value proposition? And these were things when I was an entrepreneur, no one spelled out for me. They just said, quantify your value proposition. I say, look, I'm a fake engineer. You got to tell me, what are the units? How do you do this? I mean, and so in this, I've gone back and I've spelled all this stuff out and we have a common language. And then you'll see what makes you unique. And then the interesting thing here is now in my classes, people loving this. They're saying, I love this. I know who my customer is. This persona thing was really interesting. I'm talking to customers. And now I have a great product for them. Let's just go build it and get it to them. I say, no. Wait. There's this next phase we're going to go through. What's called, how does your customer acquire your product? They say, they just acquire it. If they don't, they're stupid. No. That's not the way the real world works. That's not the way the real world. You need to understand who makes the decision. Is it the mother who makes the decision, the father, the child? Is it the data center manager, or is it the CIO? Who makes the decision? what's the decision-making unit, and then what's the process they have to go through. Because you need to understand who's involved. If it's a medical device, is it the doctor? Is it the patient? Is it the insurance company? Is it the hospital? Who is it? And this is really important because the next phase we're going to go through is, can I make money off this product? There's a lot of companies out there that start, like talk about pets.com or Groupon now, that it makes sense and they can get customers involved, but the business doesn't work. It's not going to be profitable. It's not going to be sustainable. And if you think about this up front, then you can think and make major decisions whether you should do the business, or I can do the business, but I have to sell only online. I can't afford to hire expensive salespeople, or I can hire expensive salespeople, and I really should. That will be a competitive advantage. These are important business decisions. And then once you know that, this gets into questions of what's the cost of customer acquisition? And this person right here is drunk because entrepreneurs pathologically underestimate the cost of customer acquisition. They think it's much, much lower than it is. I know, I did it. I still did it in my second company until I really broke down and got the math right. It's really hard because you're so enthusiastic about your product. We don't allow enthusiasm to get entrepreneurs in trouble. And that's what we do by figuring out what's your cost of customer acquisition. And then you weigh that against the lifetime value, and now we have an equation that we can figure out whether this is a sustainable business. And then we go through and we tell you how to efficiently and effectively build the product. This is kind of some of the stuff that's been popularized recently with Lean Startup that Stefan Tomke was doing, who's at Harvard now and was at MIT. How do you build things efficiently? How do you run small experiments? How do you test hypotheses? Basically the scientific method. And once we get it right, and only then do we scale the business. And those are basically the themes of what we go through in the book. So just to reiterate, this is a comprehensive but practical approach that's integrated. It tells you where to start and where to end, and there are lots of loops within it. And really importantly, it gives you a common language that when you talk to someone, you know, you all are saying, well, what's your core? What does that mean? What's your TAM? And you've got units. How can we have a profession if we don't have a common language to share information amongst each other? That's incredibly important here. So we talked, you need customers, you have to focus on that, but you don't want to be driven by the first customer who comes in, nor do you want to be sitting there on the internet and saying, geez, you know, there's 1.2 billion people in China, and if we just get a toothbrush sell to 0.1%, we're going to get really rich. That's just fun with spreadsheets. As we say, you'll never find a customer hiding a spreadsheet cell. You have to go out and do primary market research and find a homogeneous group of people that if you sell to one, then they'll tell somebody else and they'll buy exactly the same product. Same product, same sales cycle, word of mouth. That's the definition of being customer driven and finding a beachhead market. So, and this is a relentless search for specificity. Generalities don't win. You need to know who exactly is the customer. Well, it's this composite. No. I want you to show me a real person. And then I want you to show 10 more real people. And our product's going to do this. No, what exactly is your product going to do? What's the benefit? I want to see the brochure. I want to see what you're thinking about. Well, we're going to price it like this. Where's the data on that? So it's a relentless pursuit of specificity, which we can do these days, especially with the tools we have. But it's not an algorithm. It's an iterative process where we start and we get closer and closer to the truth, what we call spiraling innovation. And it's an integrated system, as I talked about before. When we figure out the persona, we figure out what's that number one priority, the thing that keeps them awake at night, that they will lose their job if this happens. If the data center goes down, that's a nightmare. If you get the product late to market, if you're a toy company, this is a nightmare. And that's what they really care about. You can't go in there and talk to them about, you know, let's reduce our carbon footprint, because they don't hear you if you don't address their number one need. So when you talk about that value proposition, you're basing that off the priorities. And when you talk about competitive positioning, you're taking the two priorities and laying them out, and you better be up there. This is all just, as you'll go through it, you'll see it's very logical and integrated. And that's the point. And I could extend this, but I won't for sake of time. So what you're doing, I talked about, you got to move fast as an entrepreneur. We don't have a lot of time. We don't have a lot of resources. So we have to focus ourselves. But as Ash Maurya said, to just be focused and go fast, you're a dog running around chasing its tail. You need to have frameworks. You need to be learning as you go through this. And that's how you get that spiraling innovation. I won't take you through this. You can go online. And let me just say, this book, if you just sit down and read this book, it is great. It's not enough. Go out and start a company and then apply what you learn in the book, and you'll learn so much more. It will stay with you. Entrepreneurship is not a spectator sport. It's something that you have to go out and get on the field and try. So this is Steve Jobs. It's about not just selecting things, but deselecting things. I love this quote by Steve. He said, I'm as proud of things we didn't do as the things we did do. That's discipline. There's a lot of companies that have been successful doing this. This is the book in English. There's an online tool, a free toolkit to help you, a DE Toolbox. All these slides I'll put up on SlideShare, anyone who's interested. And there's an online course that we mentioned. This is over 150,000 people have taken this course since it's been on. It's unbelievable. For every country in the world, and it's free. So I would encourage you all to do that. We have a class at MIT, which some people have been here, have gone to, if you want the full immersion. So why do we have to have a Spanish version? I think I hinted at this at the beginning. There's all these great things about Spain. Spain's a great place, but there's also other places in the world that speak Spanish. And those places are growing very, very rapidly. And they're growing faster than other places. And what entrepreneurship is about, it's the ultimate meritocracy. It's finding that person who is a gem. I didn't grow up with a lot. Unfortunately, I had parents, but Steve Jobs was an orphan. But you got to find those Steve Jobs out there, and they're gems out there, and then you got to allow those people the chance to rise up out of it. And so when I think about this, those gems are out there in the world, and they're not sitting at the top, and they don't necessarily know English. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. But we want to get down to all the people in the world and give them the chance to be entrepreneurs. And it's not a zero-sum game. It's not if they become entrepreneurs, we don't. This is everybody wins. The more entrepreneurs we have, the more they win. And these young people, whether they're Spanish or whether they're Arabic or wherever they are, we need to give them hope, and we need to give them pride, and we need to give them rigor in their lives. And if we don't, we're going to have big problems. Because what are they going to do then? The hope is you have this thing, a company, and it could change the world. Your pride is that you have ownership of it. You really have an effect. I loved working at IBM. But there were over 100,000 people at IBM. How much was I really moving the dial? And let me tell you about rigor. Rigor means you got to get it done. If you don't get it done, you might miss payroll. Some people don't like that. Let me tell you, you better learn to live with that because that's the way things are going. Change will happen. There's no jobs for life. When I joined IBM, they said you had a job for life. I could have stayed there. I probably could have worked at IBM my whole life. I am much happier that I didn't because now I know I can get dropped anywhere. I could lose everything I have in the United States. You could drop me in Madrid, I'd be fine. I create my own job. We create some jobs from other people. You could drop me in New Zealand. You can drop me in Beijing. I'll be fine, thank you. That's what we call an anti-fragile system. I control my own destiny. That's what we need to give kids. That's what we need to give kids in the future. Every kind of kid out there. And there's going to be a lot of them where the native tongue is going to be Spanish. So I am passionate about doing this. That's what I want to do for the last third. So just to summarize here, successful entrepreneurship is having the spirit of a pirate, but you also have to have the execution skills of a Navy SEAL. That means you got to be disciplined. And people say, which is more important? What do you mean? I mean, you need both. You need to be able to think differently, and when you do that, you need to have discipline to get it done. Otherwise, you're just a raconteur a cynic at a bar or someplace. But if you just have discipline without the creative spirit, you're not going to change the world. So entrepreneurs need to have both. And that's why I love the name disciplined entrepreneurship. It captures both of those things together. Okay, so with that, I will turn it over to questions. And we ask the young people for questions first. Is that okay?